Hey everybody, I'm Amanda with DevExpress and welcome to today's webinar ASP.NET MVC Frequently Asked Questions Answered, presented by DevExpress Technical Evangelist Don Wibier. In this session, Don explains and solves frequently asked questions about DevExpress ASP.NET MVC. Among other problems, Don will show how to properly add DevExpress MVC to an existing application, how to optimize load times, how to deal with data transfers between clients and server, as well as some styling related issues. This session is being recorded and it will be made available on our DevExpress YouTube channel later today. We will also do a live Q&A at the end of this presentation. Just type your questions in the GoToWebinar control panel at any time throughout the broadcast. All right, thank you so much for joining us. I will now hand things over to Don.
Thanks, Amanda, and welcome everybody. Well, as Amanda already mentioned, this webinar will deal with frequently asked questions, and the reason that I came up with this webinar is because, well, I discussed it with the team, and yeah, there are a couple of things that keep popping up in our support center. So we have created a list, and believe me, the list is longer as I can handle in this 1-hour webinar. I mean, I could easily fill out like 5 webinars with this material. But yeah, I've decided to go for like the most popular ones, or at least the ones that cause the most problems, basically. Yeah, I hope it will help you create better applications and spend less time on these kind of issues, basically. So I put together a little list with questions, what I'm going to talk about, and well, if I'm able to wrap this up in about like 15 minutes or so, we'll have like an additional 10 minutes for some questions here and there. And yeah, as Amanda mentioned, just pop them up in the chat box, and we'll see if I can handle them in the end. So first, I'm going to start with one of the most asked questions. How can I quickly access the online documentation of the MVC extensions? Next, I'm going to talk about integrating the DevExpress MVC extensions into an existing project, because the chances are that you already have an MVC application and you want to use our spreadsheet control or our rich editor or one of the cool controls that we have. And in that case, yeah, you need to know how to get that going. Well, that also brings the next bullet into the equation, because, yeah, how do we deal with DevExpress CSS and JavaScript resources? I mean, the DevExpress MVC extensions are very much client sides. They have like a really rich client experience, and well, that is done by using CSS for the styling and JavaScript for all the functionality. And well, people are struggling with it now and then, and yeah, I'm going to talk about how you can deal with that. Well then, because we are dealing with a rich client environment, yeah, how can we transfer data between server and client? How can we invoke certain methods on the server, etc.? And well, it's a bit like in the same direction. How, for instance, can you load dynamic partial views during AJAX calls containing DevExpress controls, and in a scenario that it will still work, obviously. So I'll show you how you can do that. And there are obviously different, well, several approaches, but I'll show you one of the simpler ones, which will in most scenarios be good. Well, another very important aspect is client-side validation. I mean, if you have a web application, it is very important to perform, if possible, client-side validation before posting data back to the server. And MVC obviously has a nice system in place for that, and also DevExpress has a slightly different mechanism in place for that. So yeah, how can we use one of the two or both or whatsoever? And then the last item I'm going to discuss is MVC model binding, and that is also an important aspect in the whole MVC paradigm. And yeah, that is something that I like a lot about the whole MVC framework, the model binding magic basically. So there are a couple of things to keep in the back of your head about that, and I'll discuss that as well. And as I mentioned, if we have any questions and time left, I can see if I can answer those questions on the spot. So yeah, the first one, how to quickly access the online documentation. Well, there are the two quickest ways basically are, we have a URL which is documentation.devexpress.com/MVC. And if you enter that, you'll be redirected to the appropriate landing page on our documentation site, and that will give you access to like all the documentation on the MVC extensions, things like localization, redistribution and deployment, etc. And this is basically our main entry point. And the second one shouldn't be a really big surprise, is by using Google. So if you search for DevExpress MVC something, the chances are that you'll find one of those pages from the documentation site, because that is very well indexed. Well, the next item on the list was integrating DevExpress MVC extensions into an existing project. Well, there are basically two ways of doing that. One of them, the first one, is manually. And the second one is by using a wizard that we provide. I'll show the first one, but I'm not going to actually demo that because it is quite a bit of work to have it all set up manually. But I'll show you what is involved so you have an impression. So if you want to include it manually because you want to know what's going on, you need to first reference the required assemblies. You need to register HTTP handlers. I'll talk about that a bit later. Namespaces, configuration section, etc., etc., etc. And last, you have to check your document type. So altogether, it's quite a bit of work. So I would definitely advise you to use one of our wizards that we provide. And the way that that works is pretty straightforward. So I have already created a web application with the Microsoft project template. So this is basically a website which doesn't include any of the DevExpress technology. And this one is pretty straightforward. So if I start it up, you'll see the standard project. Excuse me. Well, if we want to include the DevExpress technology in there, well, once you have installed the DevExpress controls, you'll have a menu inside Visual Studio, and one of them will be the ASP.NET controls run wizard to update the project. And well, what you can do here is a couple of things. You can apply one of the default themes that we supply, so you can have anything that you like. You can have some site configuration options, and that has something to do with the modification of the word.config. But the most important thing here is the suites that you want to use. And this is also something which we'll be discussing in the next bullet on the agenda. If you're not sure what you're going to use, I would definitely say select all. And I'm just going to do that, so you'll see what happens here. Once I've ticked all those boxes, I have, after the wizard completes, I have full access to all the controls that we have, all the MVC extensions. So we'll have the reporting, we have the grid view, we have the rich editor and all that good stuff. And what basically happens now is the wizard is performing all these steps except for the document type. So point 10, it's not going to do that. And yeah, a couple of things which are also mentioned in the side notes here. The client-side libraries and the CSS from DevExpress needs to be referenced somewhere. I'll talk about that once the wizard has finished. And one important aspect is that jQuery needs to be loaded before the DevExpress resources. And that is because the DevExpress MVC extensions rely on jQuery. So if you are already using jQuery, a specific version for some reason, you might need to change the loading order so that your jQuery version is loaded first, and then the DevExpress resources are being loaded. If you're not using jQuery at all, don't bother, because we'll supply jQuery for you. In case you are using your own jQuery version, you need to change a setting in the web.config that we should not provide the jQuery which is embedded in our resources. That's one little thing to think about. Well, the wizard has been finished, and what you'll see here is a nice informational dialog which has some code fragments in there. Basically, the most easy way to proceed right now is to hit the copy clipboard, so that it will copy all this text here, and afterwards close the wizard. Next, you can go to the shared folder. That was also what was in the dialog. And if I go to the layout section here, I can paste that fragments in here. Well, what this basically does is it will determine which style sheets need to be loaded for the DevExpress controls to load properly, and also which JavaScript needs to be loaded for the controls to function properly on the client. And in this case, I remember I had those checkboxes, so I checked all of them, so I have all that stuff here. And that means that I can use any control wherever I like. The drawback of this is that the page will take a bit longer to load. And I'll show you that. I didn't save anything yet. So if I switch over to Chrome and invoke the web development tools and hit Control F5 one more time, I'm here at the Network tab. And once the page has been reloaded, we'll see what the average load is with all the resources included, etc. And what you'll see is that it's not really a lot. I mean, there are just a couple of small files, and well, this is pretty clean, I have to say. So let's head back to the application, which includes everything, and hit Control F5 again. And once Chrome will pop up to the front again, I'll invoke the web developer tools as well. So here we are. And well, what you notice is that it will take a bit longer to load right now. And that is because all the assemblies that are referenced in the project are being loaded up. And all those assets are being requested as well. And this actually brings us, I'll keep this loading and we'll get back to it. In the meantime, I'll switch over to the next bullet, which is how to deal with the DevExpress CSS and the JavaScript resources. And that is, yeah, one of the things that we get some questions about as well. Problems you might face, for instance, DevExpress controls look strange, don't work, projects created with a wizard load slowly, yeah, or the controls, they just don't work, or you get JavaScript errors whatsoever. Well, if I switch over here, you will see that we have a couple of errors here, and that's because I didn't do the jQuery up front, but that's not the most important thing I wanted to show you right now. We have a file size of 3.2 megabytes, and
this file includes all the JavaScript for all of our MVC extensions. So it starts with navigation and layout, and it ends at dashboard and the dashboard viewer. And the reason that this is so big is because we ticked all those boxes in the project wizard to enable the DevExpress extensions into our existing project. Well, in most scenarios, this is definitely not what you want, because you want to only load the resources needed for that specific page. So, for instance, if I have a web page which contains a grid, I only want to have the resources needed for the grid, and I don't need the script for the HTML editor or the rich editor or the dashboards. So I'm going to show you how we can enable this feature by only requiring the scripts that we need on a specific view.
And for that, let me close down this project. I have prepared a small other project which has a bit less code, and it will allow me to show you a couple of tricks here. So if I run this one, you'll have quite a simple application. It only has some text and a button. And in this particular scenario, I have also loaded all those resources. So what can we do to speed up this particular page load? Well, we can actually use the razor syntax to define a couple of regions. And that allows us to load those scripts dynamically. So what you see here is the button is a DevExpress button. And again, if I check down megabyte file here, 3.1 in this case. So what can we do to reduce it? Because in this particular scenario, we only use this button. Well, the first thing is we can actually go to the layout, disable a couple of things here. So if I, for instance, disable these lines, and I'll do it here as well, because I'm only using the button and I know that the button is in the editor suite. And obviously that is pretty well documented, which control is in which suite basically. And I'll do that here as well. And with this in place, if I hit Control F5, you immediately notice that this is being loaded much quicker. And if I check the development tools and hit Control F5 again, you'll see that the 3.1 megabyte has gone and it has been reduced to like a smaller size. And the button still works. So this is something which is very important to keep in your mind, like, yeah, I need to determine what I'm not using and leave that out of the place. But as I mentioned, okay, so how can I load certain assets depending on the page I'm on? Well, for that we can use the razor syntax as I mentioned before. So let me comment out this here, and let me comment out this entire block as well. And what I'll do is I'll implement two things here. I will define a region, and the first one is going to be the styles region, and that is just standard razor. So I'll do it like this. The second parameter here is that this is not a required region in one of the pages or in one of the views basically. The second one I'm going to do is I will do basically the same one for the scripts, and I'll call that region DX scripts. If I now go to my home folder to the index, I can now script those regions in here, by simply doing the following. I can again use the Razor syntax for a section called scripts, and I will do the same for DX styles. And what I can do now, well, remember I was only using the editor section in this particular case. So if I go back, I can just copy over this entire block and put it in here. And I will remove the editors. I will remove everything but the editors. And I will do the same for the scripts. So here we are, and I will now remove everything but the editors. And with this in place, we have now made sure that those particular suites are being rendered, or at least the resources. There is actually one thing that you should be aware of, and that is that the getScripts method of the DevExpress extensions can only be called once. And if you want to enable this feature, so what this means is that if you run this twice, like one on this view and one on a partial view, you'll get like an error message. That can be solved pretty quickly by creating an extension method which does a bit of extra things besides the getScripts method. And for that, I have already included an empty C# file, and I'll include that class for you so you'll see what it does. The most important thing here is that it will set that flag back to false, and that will make sure that everything is rendered properly. I would advise you to put it in the same namespace as the original one, and in this case it's called getScriptsX. So if I now switch over to index and change this one to X, we'll have these scripts loaded on demand. So whenever you face any issues with controls which are not working, please make sure that you have the appropriate resources initialized. And the most easy way of doing so is by, on your development machine, enable all of them. Okay, the page will take a bit longer to load, but then at least you're sure that everything is loaded, and you'll see, you can check if the problem still exists. So the page is now being rendered again, and what we'll see in a minute is that we have the same page basically. All right, I'm gonna move over to the next point, and that is something which I will combine actually with the loading of partial views during AJAX calls. How can we transfer data between the server and the client? Well, we can obviously use our we can use AJAX to invoke certain methods on the server, or we can use the callback methods that are there for on the different controls. And yeah, the most interesting part is, I think, dynamically loading of controls depending on a button that you pushed or something. So if I switch back to that demo, I have just created a small issue here. So this was DXScripts. Let me quickly check what I missed out here. That was DX styles, obviously. So let me run that again. So yeah, one of the things that we're going to do now is take a look at the partial views and how to load them dynamically. For that, I also included a couple of things in this project already. And one of the things is an in-memory model, which will just return a list with some random data. You can take a look at the source. It's just composing a number of records in the data table, and that will be used in a grid. So yeah, let's first put one of those grids on this particular view, and the most easy way of doing so is by invoking the insert DevExpress MVC extension. And well, what happens where we get some questions about as well is, why are you creating a partial view which contains the grid, for instance? Because that's what's going to happen in a second. There will be a partial view created which will contain a definition of the grid with all its settings and nothing else on there. Why is that? Well, the reason is that we use that particular partial view also during callbacks. And what that means is, for instance, you have that grid and you click on one of the columns to sort. Well, that will invoke a method on the server to basically render the grid with the new sorting. And for that we could do the whole view again, but no, we are doing it a bit more efficient, and that is by just recreating that partial view. And that is why it is important with the complex controls that they are on that partial view only. So we'll have the most efficient way of regenerating certain portions of your page, basically. So here is the DevExpress extension wizard, and I will insert this grid view here. The grid view will have the name grid view 1. It will be put on the home controller. For this demo, I won't need editing. And the model class will be a in-memory model. The columns have not been selected yet, so I'll select a couple of things here. And the key field will be the ID. And well, for the rest, it's all fine with me. So if I now hit insert, you will see a couple of things happening here, and that is including the partial view with the grid definition. And you'll get this informational message again. And well, as I did before, I will just copy this section to the clipboard, and if I now close it, I can include that one in the index.chtml. So let me put it here. It will I need to copy and paste a couple of things here and there, but I will move this one to the scripts here. And let me add a comma here, and the style sheets, I will put it up at the style sheets section and put a comma here as well. So I am now making sure that the correct resources are already loaded for the grid. And what you see here is that the grid will be rendered as a partial view. There's one thing I need to change, and that is because the wizard also adds a couple of things on the controller as well. So if I go to the home controller, you'll see that the action method for the grid view partial is being generated as well, but it is not using any data to bind to. So let me bind it to that in-memory model. Get data table. So we'll have some data in there as well. And with this in place, well, the first thing you'll see is that we have the grid on the page, but I wanted to have that grid loaded once I hit that button. So that's going to be more interesting. So once the page is loaded up, we'll have the grid with all the bells and whistles on there. Here it is. We can page. We can even filter. And that pretty much works out of the box. So that is very easy to do. But now I want that grid out of the view because I only want to have it loaded once I hit that button. Well, that is also one of the advantages that we have by using those partials, because what I can do here is I can comment this one out and put a bit of code. I already put this button in and it will fire this particular onClick event, and that onClick event is now saying good, you clicked. So if I hit it, it will say okay, cool. But let's do a bit of more sophisticated stuff here by removing that alert and using a bit of jQuery and the Ajax method of jQuery. And perform a post to this particular URL. So it will do a it will basically request that grid view partial. The response is just HTML and a bit of JavaScript. Well, everything that is needed to render out that grid. I will just stuff that in this div, like here. So that partial view is actually returning everything needed to render out that grid and to do things with it. And if I will run this demo, you'll see that at first we don't have a grid, but if I click that button, we'll have the grid. So this is one of the ways of transferring and loading controls on demand through Ajax. And we'll still have everything like paging, sorting, that kind of stuff. So this is one of the tricks that is possible by using that partial architecture basically. Well, this is actually what we just been discussing, because what I did here, let me switch over to the demo project again. I invoked just an Ajax call, and in this case I did a post. I mean, for different kind of controls, you could also do a get, depending on what kind of control it is, like an image gallery, for instance. You can just perform a get, and it will give you the HTML, and you can place it wherever you like. And well, this basically also discussed the loading of the partial views during Ajax calls. What is very important, I mean, if this doesn't work from your end, please check the DevExpress JavaScript resources, and the CSS are the appropriate scripts loaded. And we have improved our wizard by giving you that particular pop-up at the end with which suites are necessary for that particular control. Make sure that they are there or it will not work. Well, then another thing which is very important is obviously validation of your data. And with the introduction of MVC, they already provided you with some validation, and we have, for instance, a couple of things. I made a small list here. They started with like model validation, and what that means is that you can put attributes on top of your properties of the model that you're working with, and that will be in some ways submitted to the client, and it will be dealt with. And to give you an example for this, let me switch back to the project. I have created a really small client here, It only has a first, a middle, a last name, and a company. And I put a couple of attributes here. And this is all being resolved from the data annotations namespace. And it's got like a ton of those attributes. And in fact, I did a webinar, I think about a year ago, about unobtrusive validation with MVC, where I explained in detail how that works and how you can create your own validation, etc. So if you want to check that one out, yeah, look on our YouTube channel and see how that works. But in a nutshell, I have now put the required attribute on top of this first name and on the last name, and that means that the model will not be validated if one of those two is empty. There are like a whole bunch of them, regular expressions, min-max validation, all kinds of stuff. This is just a simple one. And this will be validated as well on the client as the server. Well, with the introduction of MVC 3, there was the unobtrusive client validation. And well, obviously one of the things which people like about MVC besides the design pattern is also the clean HTML that it renders. But with the validation, yeah, there's a whole bunch of JavaScript being rendered in, and yeah, with version 3 of MVC, they have decided to use specific HTML5 attributes to define the validation rules, basically. So it all looks nice again, and it looks pretty clean. Well, for that, it works as well on the client as on the server, so that is important. And yeah, if you check out the jQuery client validation, that's also very complete and it's also very nice, but the problem is that it will only validate on the client. So if somebody wants to fool around with the data, he can by using Firebug or the Chrome developer tools, and it will not be validated on the server if you didn't set it up properly. Excuse me. So that is important with the jQuery client validation. It's only client side. Well, then we have the DevExpress built-in validation, and that is slightly different because we have a whole bunch of properties on our controls which allow you to do required validation, regular expression, all that kind of stuff, but it is not like the same approach as the unobtrusive client validation. The plus side of this is that it is both client and server, like the first two ones. So that is all being dealt with. And to show you a bit of the differences, I switched back and I already set up a client controller here. And I also set up a view for the client. Let me first go to the view and show you what's happening here. I have defined a form layout from DevExpress which binds to that particular client model. And what you see is that we will just bind to specific properties here. And in this particular scenario, well, especially this one and this one, it will check if there are attributes set on top of that particular property. But we can also fine-tune specific editors here. So in this case, I am passing in a configuration object for the last name property. And here I am using the properties.validation settings. So we have the required field, we have a couple of other settings in the validation settings, and that will work perfectly. But you can imagine that if you want to mix up the unobtrusive validation together with this specific validation settings, that things might get messed up a bit. Like suppose you set required field to false and the model says it's required. Yeah, what happens then? So I would advise you to go for either the DevExpress validation or the other or the unobtrusive one. But yeah, if you start mixing them up, you might face some issues. And I do have to say that if you use the DevExpress project template or the Microsoft project template, then unobtrusive validation is enabled by default. So if you don't want to use that, you have to disable that. Well, that is basically, if I switch over to the client controller, then we'll see that I put a bit of code in here, and one of the things I'm going to discuss next, and it has something to do with the validation as well, is the MVC model binding. The MVC model binding is one of the things that I like a lot. And I mean, everybody who used to develop with classic ASP or maybe is doing work with PHP, you have to deal with form data as a collection of keys and values. So all the editors that are submitted back, it's like a collection with fields. Well, it all works pretty nice, but I mean, with MVC, which stands for Model View Controller, I want to work with models instead of collections with form data. I don't want to see that form data anymore. And yeah, for that, the MVC framework has something which is called the model binder. And what that basically does, it will try to transform that form data, so basically that list with keys and values, and it will see if there is an action method with an object that it can use. So it will transform that key value pairs into an object and pass that onto your action controller. So you'll just be working with objects. The thing with the DevExpress controls is, though, that we are not always, for like a text box, you can use the default model binding. But if you are using a bit more advanced controls, we might send over that data in a slightly different format. So we will not have like a list with keys and values, but we'll combine some things here and there to make the callbacks efficiently. And for that, it is necessary to use the DevExpress model binder, basically. So how does that work? If you start a new project with DevExpress, with the project template, we'll initialize the default binder to use the DevExpress editors binder. In that case, you don't need to think about anything anymore. If you are using an existing project and you want to use this model binder just for like a specific page, maybe you're using other controls from third-party vendors, I don't know, and they might interfere with this model binder. So maybe you want to do it like on an action method approach. That is also possible. And that is, well, you already saw it in the demo by decorating the argument of this action method with the model binder directive or attribute. When I saw this for the first time, I had something like, huh? You can put like attributes on top of arguments. Okay, pretty cool. And by using this approach, you'll make sure that for this call, the DevExpress editors binder is used to transform your form data into the appropriate object. Well, and what this means is that once I run the application again, let me put a breakpoint on it. We can also check the model state here. So what we basically want, and what is going to work right now as well, is that we will have this form filled in and we'll get a client item back. So it will take a bit longer to boot up because of the debugger who needs to start working. But in a matter of seconds, we'll see that we have this nice looking form. If we switch to the client URL. So here, if I now enter my name, and I obviously put in the coolest company. If I hit submit right now, you will see that if I watch the item, well, I can better watch it here, it's a bit bigger. You will see that everything that I entered in the fields is being transformed. So the form data being sent back is now being transformed into this my client object type. And the DevExpress editors binder makes sure that all the controls are being transformed correctly into that object that we want to have. So this is also something to keep in mind. If you're not getting values back as expected, check if your DevExpress editors binder is being used, either in the global ASX, because if I check that one out here, you'll actually see that we put this one up, or if you have enabled it in an existing application, maybe you forgot to put this one in. So yeah, an important thing to remember as well. And yeah, with this, Amanda, I don't know if there are like any questions. We still have some time for it.
Hey, Don. Yeah, we do have some questions that came in. Let me see. The first one says, how does the anti-forgery token work in MVC?
Oh, that is an interesting one. Well, the thing with MVC obviously is that you do like quite a bit of posts here and there. And I mean, you saw me do a post to get that grid on demand. That could be done automated as well. So that would pretty much be like a potential security issue. If somebody wants to take your site down, he could do like a whole bunch of automated posts here and there. And with that anti-forgery token, that is like an extra check to make sure that the page was first being requested before you can post it in the blind back to the server. If that token is not valid, the post will not be handled, and that means basically if I switch over to the project again, that would actually mean, where is my page? The client controller. That would mean that this breakpoint would not be hit. So this is just to make sure that your server is not like flat with posts basically, and your action methods are being saved for like real requests. That's the purpose of the anti-forgery token.
Great. From Larry, he says, my DevExpress menu in Visual Studio 2015 only has 3 choices: ASP.NET Controls, Project Converter, and Repair Toolbox. So running the wizard the way you showed it isn't possible. He's wondering if he doesn't have it installed properly, or if you have any help for him.
Well, that is obviously pretty difficult to answer right now.
I thought maybe you might know, what was happening.
I have to say myself, I installed one of the Visual Studio 2017 versions, which was like a release candidate or an early release candidate. I installed the DevExpress set on there, and all kind of stuff didn't work. Once the official 2017 was released, I did a reinstall of DevExpress, and it still didn't work. I now reinstalled another machine with 2017, and now everything works. So yeah, that's really difficult to say, but I would definitely ask you to contact support about it. They can tell you in a minute. Maybe you have like an older version or something, I don't know.
Okay, let's see. What is the significance of the EDMX file to move data between server and client? Are there better alternatives?
I'm not quite sure.
Okay.
Maybe you can give me some more info on it.
Are all these components responsive to use together with Bootstrap? From Mauricio.
That is a good question. Well, the controls are responsive, but they will not render Bootstrap like the Bootstrap HTML. But the controls themselves, I mean the grid and the editor and all the complex controls, specifically the things like a grid, they are responsive as well as adaptive. Please check our YouTube channel on that one because we have a couple of really cool features, and Mahul has done a webinar in the past about the adaptive features on the grid, which allows you to hide out columns depending on the width of your screen. You can do all kinds of fun stuff with that, but it is not like the same HTML rendered as Bootstrap, no. But it is responsive.
All right, from Pedro, are you planning to remove the limitation about the endless paging mode with the batch edit on the grid?
I can't tell you right now. I don't know.
Does MVC model binding work with DevExtreme widgets?
Yes, it does, but for that you will have to use the DevExpress MVC version. That will include like the razor bindings and all the stuff that you're used to from MVC, with the rich client-side controls that we have with DevExtreme. But that is like a different architecture, different controls. But yes, with DevExtreme MVC, you can definitely use the model binding.
And from Marco, I use DevExpress web forms on a daily basis. Can you say anything on the performance difference between MVC and web forms?
Yeah, well, I mean, the controls of our MVC extensions, I mean, they're called extensions because they are based on the same core rendering stuff that we have with web forms. You could, yeah, I mean, the difference between web forms and MVC is obviously quite big. And there are certain things during callbacks on web forms which might be a bit less efficient. Yeah, so that's pretty difficult to say. But I mean, with MVC, if you want to switch over to MVC, you'll face some other challenges which are not directly DevExpress related, but just like the architecture is different, you have to do a lot of coding here and there, and you'll face other challenges to if you compare that with web forms. So
let's see, from Anup, is Angular supported?
Yeah, well, I mean, you can obviously use Angular, but I don't think that's like for this kind of projects. I mean, I've been talking about our MVC extensions, and that is something different. It's like a complete different architecture. So yeah, you could use Angular, but I'm not sure if that would make much sense. If you are planning on using Angular, I would probably you'll be better off by using DevExtreme because we have DevExtreme integration in Angular.
Let's see, you had mentioned that jQuery comes included with the necessary scripts. Where do you update the config if you're using your own version of jQuery?
Oh, that is actually a good question. Let me open up my, let me stop my project here. And let me go to the section of DevExpress here. Here we are. And we have a section, I think it is defaulted to true. Let me see, there is one of the options here. Can't remember which one it is. It's not included here because it's defaulted by it's defaulted to true. but one of the options is to embed jQuery. Let me look that up for you, and I'll get back to that if there are any more questions.
Let's see. Brian's asking about, and you may not know this, might be a support question, but has the issue with an additional field in JSON in the JSON call been resolved?
I have no idea. That is probably an issue which is on support, or that has been reported to our support.
I'll send him it's support at DevExpress.
Please. Yeah.
From Benny, he says, according to your shown answer, is it possible to include some CSS and JavaScript libraries in the layout file and the particular libraries in the views only when needed?
Well, what I just showed is obviously I already have some scripts which are loaded when they're needed, but I mean you have to be sure of the thing that needs to be clear basically is that these scripts for the grid, for instance, what I did here, this needs to be available before that grid is being loaded, and it doesn't matter if that grid is being loaded through Ajax or that grid is being loaded on this way. That those resources need to be available, otherwise the grid won't work. So yes, I could create like another partial view which will be loaded in this particular view and include that stuff over there, and then have like another partial view which will render out the grid or something, but it needs to be available before you load it. That's basically the idea.
Let's see. Okay, we have time for, there's one more question from Anup. Does the ASP.NET MVC DevExpress kit have mobile touch events and controls, or is that on DevExtreme as well?
All of our controls are touch and mobile friendly. So yes, that is available. They will work on any touch device. They will just work. I mean, with pinching, zooming, all that kind of stuff.
Okay, that's it.
All right. Well, I'm sorry I couldn't get that answer back, the web.config setting, but I can't remember who asked it, but drop me an email and I'll reply to you about that config setting.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Don. All right, everybody, like I mentioned before, today's webinar will be available later on our DevExpress YouTube channel, and I did post the link to our YouTube channel in the chat box. We have one more webinar scheduled currently for next Tuesday, April 4th, Demystifying DevExpress Charts. Join DevExpress CTO Julian Bucknell and Technical Evangelist Paul Usher as they show you how to get started with charts. In this session, you'll learn how to choose the best chart type for the job, the anatomy of a chart, how to prepare data for optimal results, and the DevExpress Chart Wizard. The presentation will cover WinForms and ASP.NET controls, as well as charts in reports and dashboards. So that is next Tuesday, April 4th, and we're always scheduling new webinars, so you can check devexpress.com/webinars and register for that today. And that is it for this one. Thank you so much to Don. Thank you all for joining us, and of course, thank you for choosing DevExpress. Bye-bye.